The use of fear has been the primary propaganda technique that has always existed. And people that fearmonger typically are narcissists, and they don't have any concern or consideration about reality. And why fear works so well is because when you invoke fear, it actually induces a reduction in the cognitive abilities of people in the moment. It shrinks their momentary awareness because it's taking advantage of the fight or flight. And so it's used for straw manning. And that's the irony, is that if you can provoke social fear and then you can project that fear onto a group, you see, that is why the work of Edward Bernays in The Engineering of Consent and his book The Propaganda was such a dangerous thing, where Freudian psychoanalysis and psychology became, militarized, where the work of Edward Bernays got into the hands of the propagandists in Nazi Germany, for example, and became the basis of all modern public relations. In fact, Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, created public relations as a euphemism for propaganda, understanding that he could package this, that he could create public relations, and he made himself rich. He created everything about modern consumer culture. He sold consumption as an indoctrination vehicle to control the masses. And everything going wrong in America is a direct product of 100 years of education and media based propaganda that has been used to segregate people from their own humanity. And we have seen it go to the point of an almost total annihilation of our society, is where we're facing right now. Yet people are unwilling to look because they're too afraid. And so people want to be business as usual. And we're seeing fear mongering being used even by internet celebrities that are getting in on cashing out selling supplements by making nonsensical, irrational assertions about food ingredients. And so fear mongering and blitzing a population with dehumanizing wars and all these things is what every single government today is doing. And public relations and propaganda is a universal tool of power. And that is what's being used right now. It's being used in schools. It's being used in social networking. It's being used by every single conspiracy theory based website. It's being used by all of the media organizations. And it is being used by every single government. And it's even based on many false assumptions and assertions about people, because the chaos that we're seeing today was what was presented to be avoided by mass consumption. Not understanding the neurological realities of human psychology, Sigmund Freud's work is invalid. He thought that when people got in groups and panicked and would destroy a government for no reason, he thought that those dark libidinal forces were primitive drives that were part of the human psyche that we evolved away from. But he was wrong. You see, the ego is actually a structure within the fight or flight paradigm. And by harnessing the ego, public relations has actually created the very titanic monster that they were suggesting mass consumption would avoid. And so mass consumerism was sold to the United States and corporate America. But the effects it had on the human psyche resulted in exaggerated greed, where the corporations and the government that promised to shepherd this docile community that would be made happy and fat and content, they ran it into the ground. They got too greedy, that these things like planned obsolescence and consumer debt that were used to get us to just have insatiable desires and needs to spend money and put us all on these treadmills resulted in more greed and more narcissism and more fear. where the fears of failure will now have you jump off buildings, and where people feel so inadequate that we had to develop a field of medicine to make women into Barbie dolls, and men need testosterone and hair transplants, and now half of young men are involuntary celibates, and half of women are online pornographers. Can't get enough validation, and there's no amount of drugs, alcohol, medicine, material possessions, luxury goods that seems to pacify the masses of people. That rather than making them docile, they're getting hostile. And now we're starting to see these fallacies showing their ugly head. While you might think that we're smarter because of technology, we're not. And artificial intelligence will be the worst thing that we can do, because we've already developed a generation of people that have no idea what's going on, because they can use YouTube videos to replace their own imaginations. And people just want. And so we've made people so narcissistic that they don't even know their neighbors anymore. And the fear has reached a point where people are breaking down, where children can't go to schools in America, where we can't even humanize each other. And what was supposed to be a melting pot, a beacon of freedom and light and hope, has been hijacked by greed and evil. That we're seeing the worst caliber of people gravitating with the narcissism of greed and power, and no concern about the future, and lies being told, and fighting over the very fabric of reality due to the fear that just keeps getting amplified to the point where we're putting the most malignant leaders, like dangerous times, to be having sociopaths and narcissists with launch codes and megalomaniacs declaring wars for no reason, and people so dissociated and dehumanized that all they do is argue and bicker like children, powerless, more interested in being right and winning arguments, and totally disabled from any rational discourse, that they think that this is what we got to do, is just fight and be right. And they fearmonger religiously, where fear was not the message of Jesus, that hell is what we're living through right now, and heaven was merely a restoration of normal. And so this is not business as usual. This is, what they predicted. A complete narcissistic cesspool of greed, entitlement, anger, trolling, hatred. And look at how people treat each other. That we've normalized trolling, and it sets public policy, where people have to apologize to the pitchfork, thumb-sucking, proclaimed social victims who entitle themselves to be traumatized by somebody's Twitter feed. And you got to hire a public relations expert to craft you a bullshit apology for something you said on Twitter 10 years ago. And a comedian can't even try to be funny anymore without some special interest victims group combing through their Twitter to get themselves some donations. And so everybody is now an indoctrinated, entitled, opinionated victim, fighting with one another over who's got the biggest victim claim. And if we don't wake up from this nonsense, it's going to get very ugly in America, because you think that this is some God-chosen land, and they've been fleecing our population and breaking our minds so thoroughly that they've engineered the total destruction of this country financially already. And, they don't care, because those mentalities always put themselves before everyone else. And so this is the effect. Narcissism as public policy. And when I'm seeing those types of people being the types of people that we think are good people, that's a problem.